Hello again, Bike Fitness Coaching here. We're going to be talking about it's that time of the year again. I've started to hear a lot of people replying back to the videos, which is a good thing, about equipment failures, cleats getting stuck into shoes, that there's no maintenance been done, therefore the shoes are ruined, the cleats are ruined, bike trainers are rusting up, so it's time of the year again to do a little bit of maintenance on your trainer and bicycle. So let's get started. For the kicker bike, which is primarily what we're looking at here, uh, after each ride, just wipe it down with a clean, dry cloth. If you want to use a little bit of alcohol, rubbing alcohol on a towel, use some lemon pledge, something like that, just to keep it clean, especially along the top tube, as you see over here, because the sweat can get into here. It will run down through the top tube and down the seat or the frame tube, let's call it, and out the bottom here. There is a drain hole through here. We've confirmed that. I usually run a towel across the top here, across to protect the shifter levers and the stem and the headset, etc., and put a towel across here as well to keep any large amount of sweat from getting into the inside of the WAHOO kicker bike. Make sure the feet are secured and the bike isn't rocking back and forth. You can remove and clean the shifter jacks periodically. If you have a towel over here covering this whole area, you really don't need that to do this as often. I would recommend a towel because it keeps the sweat off of the electronic brain, which is right here. Crank tightness, you can do this periodically 4 times a year or so. You want to basically just make sure the pinch bolts are tight. If the pinch bolts are tight, the fixing bolt is going to be tight as well. You can apply a little bit of grease to the frame rails, so this is easier to slide up and down. You can check the torque on all these bolts. This is actually looking at the bottom of the bike. You can apply a little bit of grease to these as well to keep them from rusting. These as well, this is the stem bolts to keep these covered, again with a towel. I've replaced mine with stainless steel screws to keep them from rusting. If you have pets, make sure that this is vacuumed out and clean. This is providing the cooling for the load unit. Keep the extractors clean. You can apply a little bit of silicone spray, lube to these as well. Again, if you do have pets, you're going to require a little bit more maintenance on the bike because all this stuff will get full of cat or dog fur. The handlebar tape you can replace as needed. Again, if you run a towel over this, you don't need to replace it as often. If you do replace this, double check the aluminum handlebars. Make sure there's no corrosion. There was a previous video we did on handlebar corrosion where handlebars were cracking in half, not on the WAHOO kicker bike, but on other bicycles that were used on indoor trainers. Wipe and clean down the seat post, the head tube and headset and fork steerer. Keep the QR, the quick releases lubed and cleaned. Tighten the screws. You don't need to do these other than maybe once a year just to double check all the screws. It's a 2mm Allen wrench. Again, check the saddle clamp bolts. Usually they stay pretty tight. The pinch bolts we've already seen. Make sure that this crank arm is on secure. You would unloosen the pinch bolts. Make sure this is tight, but not overly tight. This is more of the preload. The tighter you make this, the more you squeeze the bearings. You want this tight enough where this crankset does not bounce back and forth, but tight enough so it keeps it all snug with not overly tighten the bearings. Tighten the pinch bolts and you're basically done with the maintenance. Other trainers recommend to wipe down the trainer the same and the bike after each session. Use a dry cloth and alcohol if needed. Lube the trainer's frame bolts periodically. So these are all these bolts here that are going to potentially rust on here. Make sure you remove the pedals and lightly grease, retighten at least a couple times a year. Check your bicycle handlebar for corrosion damage. Again, if you want to use a towel, that's the best option. Check stem for tightness and corrosion. Lube the drivetrain. So keep everything with maybe a silicone spray on the derailleurs, and just keep everything nice, clean, and rust free. Don't let your cleats get this bad. The problem is here now, the cleats are rusted into the shoes. So basically you've ruined the cleats and you can't get them out. So the shoes more than likely are ruined as well. There are ways to put some penetrating oil in here. You can use maybe a Torx wrench to loosen these up. You got to get the rust and corrosion removed first. I would recommend then going inside the shoe and replacing the cleat adapter plate that's on the inside, getting new screws, new cleats, and keep these lubed. You can remove these a couple times a year, lube everything back up again to keep it from rusting and potentially ruining your shoes. Here's my old look pedals after 2 years of indoor cycling. As we got into it a little bit last video, the axles were completely locked up. The sweat got into here. I was able to remove this and pack it completely 100% with grease and put this back in, but after the second time these threads were stripped. So look, it looks like, look makes it so you have to buy new pedals instead of being able to rebuild them, compared to Shimano, which you can rebuild those a number of times. So look, I've gone back to Shimano on most of my bike products again. Here's the bottom side. You can see some of the grease that's in here, keeping this nice and clean. But again, the axles were completely rusted up. The bearings were solid and the axles would not turn. Again, don't let them get this bad. Replace these as needed. Keep the dirt, debris, and rust off, and you're going to have a nice cycling experience indoors. So with that, we'll see you in the next video.